Welcome there in Shack Politics. We have more news on the Israel and Palestine conflict that is happening here. Brian Mast, a pro-Israel hawk, is set to lead the U.S. House Foreign Policy panel. Rights advocates are decrying this nomination of the Florida Republican who has compared Palestinian civilians to Nazis. You heard that right. So coming from Al Jazeera, Washington, Palestinian rights advocates in the United States are denouncing the selection of Republican Congressman Brian Mast to lead the House Foreign Affairs Committee. What's important to note about him is that the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, has highlighted Mast's history of anti-Palestinian statements, including his vilification of civilians and his call for destroying infrastructure in Gaza. They say Brian Mast might be the perfect person to serve as a spokesperson for the war criminals of the Israeli government, but he has no business running congressional hearings on sensitive international issues that impact our nation's security, CAIR Government Affairs Director Robert McCaw said in a statement. Mast hit back at CAIR on Wednesday and said, "I'd be more concerned if they were supporting me. Pace yourselves and buckle up." So if Mast were successful, and let's remember that Mast is the person who wore an Israeli army uniform to the U.S. Capitol last year, would preside over that panel and oversee legislation related to foreign policy. Now, Mast is a U.S. Army veteran who lost his legs in an attack in Afghanistan. He has previously served as a civilian volunteer in the Israeli military. Now, that to me is particularly disgusting because that makes him a war criminal for serving in the IDF and volunteering to serve in that so that he could go there and commit war crimes against people in a foreign land. It's just not something to do. And then to come back to America and wear the IDF uniform in the U.S. Capitol is just one of the most weirdest, treasonous, and just disrespectful things that you could do to anybody, to be honest here. Since the start of Israel's war in Gaza in October last year, Mast has publicly defended Israel's right to use any means necessary to attack the Palestinian enclave. Last year, for example, Mast said humanitarian aid to Gaza should be slowed down despite a suffocating Israeli siege that has caused deadly starvation in the enclave. The ICC, International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in November for suspected war crimes, including the use of hunger as a weapon of war. Mast has also suggested that all Palestinians in Gaza are legitimate targets for Israeli violence and starvation. That's insane to me. So he's fully on board with the genocide. He says, "I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians during World War II. It is not a far stretch to say that there are very few innocent Palestinian civilians," the U.S. congressman said last year. That's insane. So he basically compared them to Nazis, saying that there's no innocent Nazi civilians, so there's also no innocent Palestinian civilians. And he thinks it's okay to starve them all and to kill them all. They are all, subjects of violence and starvation. The remarks prompted Democratic Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs to lead an unsuccessful push to formally rebuke Mast in the House. Quote, "Brian Mast's comments are incredibly dangerous and dehumanizing as we continue to push for humanitarian aid to reach Palestinians in harm's way in Gaza and as Islamophobic hate crimes rise," Jacobs said in a statement at the time. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of the anti-war group Code Pink, described Mast as one of the most cruel, heartless members of Congress. His total disregard for Palestinian civilians fans the flames of violence. His position as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee bodes ill for a foreign policy that strives to protect human life and promote peace, she told Al Jazeera. Benjamin and other activists confronted Mast on Capitol Hill about his views earlier this year. When asked whether he has seen pictures of Palestinian children killed by Israel, the Republican legislator responded, "These are not innocent Palestinian civilians." Notice how he didn't respond with the word children. He very clearly called them civilians. It's terminology that they're using. It's the vocabulary that dehumanizes them. There are no children. There are no women. It's all just terrorist, 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 person, there's civilian terrorists, all the terms they use are very dehumanizing. Israel has killed at least 44,800 Palestinians, including more than 17,000 children in Gaza since the start of the war, according to local health authorities. United Nations experts and right groups have described the Israeli campaign as a genocide, an effort to destroy the Palestinian people in whole or in part. Mast rejects any criticism against Israel by international groups in the UN. He has also called for disbanding of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, the UNRWA. It's just absolutely insane to me. Hassan El-Tayyab, legislative director for Middle East policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, a Quaker social justice group, called Mast one of the most ferociously anti-Palestinian voices in Congress. Quote, "His position unfortunately reflects a broader sentiment among too many Congress members who continue to supply unconditional weapons and military support to Israel despite the Netanyahu government violating countless U.S. laws and policies throughout its indiscriminate military campaign in Gaza and beyond," El-Tayyab told Al Jazeera. Netanyahu's office welcomed Mast's nomination earlier this week, hailing the congressman as a great American patriot and a true friend of Israel. Yikes. Now, also, we talked about this a little bit last week, but you can pick up Gaza Cola for 30 GBP. And I'm actually going to see if they'll do, maybe they'll import some of this to the States. 100% of profits from Gaza Cola go to humanitarian projects in Palestine. That's pretty cool. It's an apartheid-free alternative, a product of Palestine House, a Palestinian cultural organization and nonprofit community interest company in London. This is a 24-pack of cans, 250 milliliters, perfect for sharing events or stocking up. That's pretty neat. And they have a 6-pack for 12 GBP. So I don't know. We might have to dig into that and see if that's something worth trying. Next, U.S. Senator John Fetterman, who is bought and sold by Israel, funded by AIPAC here, over $247,000 sent to him from the pro-Israel lobby. He tweets, "By continuing to hold hostages captive, Hamas owns these deaths and the entire humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. Send the hostages home now and surrender. End this regional misery and chaos." And as we can see here, he's screenshotted Reuters saying, Israel says deaths of 6 hostages in Gaza probably linked to Israeli strike. And then, of course, we have AIPAC Tracker down there in the comments letting you guys know how much genocide John gets from AIPAC. And if we pull that up, 247,000. We can also see that Israel is still holding more hostages than Hamas. Very interesting. So as of October 7th, 2023, it's 255 to 1319. And then October 7th, 2024, as some of the hostages were released, it's down to 101, whereas hostages held by Israel has increased to 3,398. And then, of course, these are detainees that are not being held under any sort of particular charges. They can just pick you up and throw you in jail for no reason. There's no laws there about, oh, we have to release you within 24 to 48 hours if we don't stick you with a charge, if we don't have evidence or probable cause. they can just kind of indefinitely jail you. Now, also, and I would say this is more of a good news kind of thing, maybe. Palestinian offer. I would say this is actually a good news kind of thing. Actually, Palestinian author Refaat Alareer's book of poems, If I Must Die, is now in the top 500 on Amazon. Alareer was killed by an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza alongside several of his family members. And of course, you can get the book If I Must Die. This is poetry and prose. If I Must Die, poetry and prose. Refaat left us, but his word must not. And of course, here you can see a couple screenshots as it's ranking in books, and it's actually gotten down, last I've seen, to number 72 in books, within the top 100 in books, number 1 in Middle Eastern poetry, number 1 in Middle Eastern literature, and number 2 in sociology reference. That's pretty shocking that people are wanting to read up on this and read up on like what the experience is on the ground there and what someone has to say through the beautiful language of poetry. And it's an incredible read. I actually have one of his books. It's Gaza Writes Back, and it has some of his writings and some writings of some well-known poets in Gaza. And of course, got that book pretty much right after he was killed. Amnesty International concludes that Israel is committing genocide and calls on countries to take action. We have another report here from Prem Thacker. The Palestinian people will not recover from this in our lifetimes as a people, and we're failing to call it what it is. We will look back in years to come and say, why did we not do more earlier? Amnesty International Executive Director Paul O'Brien says to Zateo. From the clear pattern of causing intergenerational harm by dropping bombs on residential areas at night where children, infants, parents, and grandparents are sleeping, to the constant forced movements of populations that are already traumatized by having been displaced and then attacking them once they have been moved. It is absolutely not the case that Israel's violence can be understood exclusively as an attempt to defeat Hamas. So yeah, let's actually dive in a little bit to the article here. So another thing he says here is that there's a misunderstanding that it's impossible to watch a genocide unfolding before your eyes, but that's precisely what is happening, and I'm convinced we'll look back in years and come to say, why did we not do more earlier? So Amnesty International reached its conclusion after examining Israel's actions and statements over a 9-month period from October 7, 2023 to early July and interviewing more than 200 people, including Palestinian victims of Israeli airstrikes, displacement, and detention, local authorities in Gaza, healthcare, and aid workers. Here in Deir al-Balah, it's like an apocalypse, says Muhammad, a 42-year-old father of 3, was quoted by Amnesty as saying, "There's no room for you to pitch a tent. You have to set it up near the coast. You have to protect your children from insects, from the heat, and there is no clean water, no toilets, all while the bombing never stops. You feel like you are subhuman here." And as we look here, it says that Israel's claims are not credible. Amnesty's intensive 296-page report covers everything from airstrikes to aid sieges to agricultural decimation. We've seen that of them like destroying and burning fields of olive trees and stuff like that, even in the West Bank. Destruction of cultural and religious sites, and that includes Christian ones as well. So not just Muslim ones, but especially the Christian ones that are in Palestine. Some of the oldest churches in the world, some of the very places where Jesus was born and died, and the church in Bethlehem that was bombed last year, and they celebrated the Christmas celebrations by putting Jesus in the rubble of that church. It's incredibly ironic. So, on multiple occasions, Amnesty notes the organization shared its findings with Israeli authorities but received no substantive response. The Israeli government has repeatedly balked at charges of genocide, claiming it takes great efforts to protect civilians while Hamas deliberately puts civilians in danger. The U.S. has made similar defenses, and when pressed, often defaults to its line that Israel has a right to defend itself. Sure. Amnesty found such claims as not credible, saying that the presence of Hamas does not absolve Israel from its obligation to avoid indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks, 100%. From the clear pattern of causing intergenerational harm by dropping bombs on residential areas at night, something that we already looked into, where children, infants, parents, and grandparents are sleeping. Of course, bombing them anytime they're moving from refugee camp to refugee camp. They say, hey, we're going to bomb here. You guys got to be out by this time. And then they bomb them as they're leaving, or they shoot them as they're leaving. Like, there's no escape from this stuff. There's no right way to do this from the Palestinian side. Like, you evacuate, they kill you. You stay there, they kill you. You do anything, they kill you. Just existing is a crime. One worker told Amnesty their organization actually chose not to even try notifying the Israeli government of their movements, as Palestinian staff actually feared that would put them at a higher risk, because, of course, all these aid groups and stuff have been intentionally targeted by Israel. We've seen ambulances, we've seen aid groups targeted, we've seen doctors targeted, we've seen hospitals, schools, churches, everything targeted by Israel. So they said, of course, they don't think it will stop Israel. On the contrary, it may make them more of a target. Amnesty also said that there's a sufficient basis to conclude that Israel has committed several acts with the specific intent to destroy Palestinians in Gaza, a finding that fits the human rights group's definition of genocide, the legal definition of genocide. Unlike in many other cases of genocide, O'Brien noted, the expression of such intent in Israel has come from top officials of 102 dehumanizing and genocide inciting statements from Israeli officials. Amnesty identified over 9 months, 22 were made by senior officials in charge of managing Israel's violent campaign. So Amnesty International is also joining the growing list of experts. Of course, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister for war crimes, former defense minister, rather. An International Court of Justice case led by South Africa accused Israel of genocide and has had several nations, including Spain, Ireland, and Belgium, join. The ICJ has ordered Israel to prevent acts of genocide, which Israel has since continued to flout while the case proceeds. Yikes. The Israel military has killed at least 44,000 plus Palestinians, injured at least 105,000, and displaced an estimated 90% of the people in Gaza since the war began. So let's keep in mind, Gaza has a population of over 2 million people. So to displace 90% of them is a very large amount. The death and injury toll is feared to be a drastic undercount due to decimated health and tracking capabilities and thousands missing in the rubble. With its conclusion, Amnesty International now joins an ever-burgeoning list of people and organizations that have found Israel to be committing acts of genocide against Palestinians. These include UN special reporters, right, like Francesca Albanese, Holocaust historian and author of The United States and the Nazi Holocaust, Barry Trachtenberg, Israeli-American Holocaust and Genocide professor Omer Bartov, Israeli Holocaust historian Amos Goldberg, co-founder of the Human Rights Watch and Holocaust survivor Aryeh Nier, the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention and Human Security, the University Network for Human Rights, the International Federation for Human Rights, Jewish Voice for Peace, South Africa, Nicaragua, Belgium, Ireland, Colombia, Libya, Egypt, Cuba, Mexico, Palestine, Spain, Turkey, Chile, Maldives, Bolivia, and U.S. Representatives Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Summer Lee, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush. Now, we also have to note from the AP that humanitarian aid to northern Gaza has mostly been blocked for the last 2 months, according to the UN. This is from December 11th, United Nations. Humanitarian aid to North Gaza, where Israel launched a ground offensive on October 6th, has largely been blocked for the past 66 days, the United Nations said Tuesday. That has left between 65,000 and 75,000 Palestinians without access to food, water, electricity, or health care, according to the world body. In the north, Israel has continued its siege on Beit Lahia, Beit Hanoun, and Jabalia, with Palestinians living there largely denied aid. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, known as OCHA, said recently about 5,500 people were forcibly displaced from 3 schools in Beit Lahia to Gaza City. Adding to the food crisis, only 4 UN-supported bakeries are operating throughout the Gaza Strip, all of them in Gaza City, according to OCHA. Now, the UN has established the logistics for an operation across Gaza, she said, but there is no substitute for political will that humanitarians don't possess. Now, this is coming from Sigrid Kaag, a senior UN humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza. Kaag also said that other UN officials keep repeatedly asking Israel for access for convoys to North Gaza and elsewhere to allow in commercial goods, to reopen the Rafah crossing from Egypt in the south, and to approve dual-use items. Israel's UN mission said it had no comment on Kaag's remarks. The UN has established logistics for an operation across Gaza, she said, but there is no substitute for political will that humanitarians don't possess, of course, there. So she said member states possess it, and this is what she urged the Security Council members, and keeps urging the broader international community to press for the political will to address Gaza's worsening humanitarian crisis. From Hossam Shabat, he is reporting in Gaza. He is one of the journalists that we've been following there. If we take a look at what he has to say, he says the situation in northern Gaza is beyond catastrophic. Israeli occupation forces have destroyed about 90% of the buildings, leaving displaced families to seek shelter in schools. But over the past few months, these schools have also been targeted and destroyed. Now thousands of people are sleeping on the streets without any shelter, with women and children forced to sleep on the ground. The end goal is to make northern Gaza uninhabitable in order to ethnically cleanse the remaining population to build settlements. This is his report as of December 7th, 2024. Oh, from the UN, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, has a statement that she has made. In the last month of my tenure at the UN, I would like to leave a legacy that the U.S. cares, is what she says. And let's listen to the last bit of her statement here.
Back American leadership, and I think we accomplished that in spades. And if there's anything that people say about me after I'm gone, I hope they say she respected us and she was kind. What I tell everyone is you can't... Unfortunately,
none of that is true, because According to Amnesty International, Israel is committing genocide in Gaza with full U.S. support. And guess who is pictured here raising her hand at the United Nations with the rest of her buddies over there, which are commonly standing against any sort of movements against an end to the occupation, the genocide, a ceasefire, a release of the hostages. All opposition is known through this person. So this is her legacy. She has claimed it on Twitter to be for the Palestinians and wanting ceasefire and all that, yet she's voted against it. We saw that she was previously community noted for pretending to be pro-Palestine for a moment. So no, we won't remember you. We will remember that your legacy was that you didn't care, and when you could stand against genocide, you stood for it. So literally, if there were a Nazi party masquerading around today, killing Jews, you would be the one at the United Nations. You'd be the one in the front row saying, listen, guys, I think we're all overreacting. This is really not that bad of a deal. I don't see a genocide. She's doing, if you ever imagine what you would do during World War II, she would be defending the Nazi party, because that's what we have today, is a modern day Holocaust. So no, we won't remember you with any sort of reverence. We won't remember that you cared, because you didn't care. And those are the facts. So take that to the bank. Pope Francis has now unveiled the Vatican's annual Nativity scene, and this year, it's featuring the baby Jesus cradled in a Palestinian keffiyeh. Now, let's remember that last year, the church in Bethlehem was bombed, and this was notably one of the places where Jesus was born. He was born in Bethlehem. So, how they celebrated Christmas last year was that they actually had their manger scene of baby Jesus swaddled in a keffiyeh, and they just put him in the rubble of the church. And their manger scene was the rubble of the church, and they sort of created their scene around that. So, I mean, it's a powerful statement, and it shows that, you know, even if Jesus were there, it wouldn't matter to these people. These are war criminals. They're terrible people, and, you know, they're bombing, you know, Christian churches, Christian sacred areas throughout the Holy Land. The Zionist Jews don't care about this stuff. Next, reporting from Sarah Wilkinson, over 20 Palestinians were killed and injured by the Israelis on Monday night in a strike on residential homes in Beit Hanoun to the north of Gaza. This is reporting as of December 10th. And so 20 Palestinians were killed during Israeli shelling of Beit Hanoun. The correspondent affirmed that 20 civilians were killed and injured. Several others were injured in the Beit Hanoun attack. The Israeli artillery shelling targeted the northeastern parts of the Beit Lahia project north of the Strip. Meanwhile, an Israeli airstrike targeted the eastern areas of Jabalia camp, while Israeli artillery shelling targeted the western part of the camp. In the midst of catastrophic humanitarian suffering for more than 2 million Palestinians, half of them children, the Israeli occupation army continued for the 430th consecutive day to pound and target different areas and massacre more civilians in the Gaza Strip, especially in the northern areas, which, once again, we were saying that there's a shortage here. Now, this next one is a video here. It's a horrific massacre of the Kahlout family in Beit Hanoun in North Gaza. They've been wiped from the civil registry. The Israelis have killed them all. So this is actually reporting, Sarah Wilkinson's reporting it as well. But we also saw that Hossam Shabat was posting these images and talking about this. Now, what's been translated here as what Hossam Shabat says is that bodies are in the streets without burial, a horrific massacre committed by the occupation forces in Beit Hanoun, where the Kahlout family was exterminated. 25 martyrs, including the father, sons, their wives, and grandchildren, in a crime that erases a family from the civil registry. Now, what that means, to put it in a perspective that maybe somebody, in the United States or Europe might be able to understand, is that this would be like wiping out your entire family or your entire family tree in just one moment. There would be no lineage, there would be no children, no grandchildren, nothing like that. Now, this one's really interesting. This is sort of a reaction video that's really just disgusting. But it is a Christian Zionist who finds out how Israel views Christians. There will be none left in the Middle East by the time Greater Israel is enacted. And this video shows just a bunch of Zionist Jews running amok here. So let's take a look at that. So it's not just grown adults here, but it's actually there's actually children here harassing these people. And they don't care whether you're Christian Zionists, you're Americans, whatever, what have you. And these are children that are screaming in the streets. So it's the adults passing down this type of behavior to the children to act in this way, to harass people and to beat them. So you can see they're picking up papers, they're picking up stones, they're speaking in threatening ways. They called her a daughter of a bitch. And see, they keep throwing things. And keep in mind, these are children, but these are very hate-filled children. I mean, this is not right. Children should not be acting like this. So if it wasn't probably for someone intervening, and notice they also try to cover the camera there. They know that when they're committing crimes, they don't want to be caught. Now notice what this guy does. Watch him again, because he falls over after what he does. He tries to kick her, but he gets caught in the dress and falls down. Yeah, notice they're hitting her with stuff. And they're covering the camera, trying to cover up their war crimes so that they can beat these people in the streets. I don't think anyone should be mistreated, even if they're Zionist Christians, which is absolutely insane to me. But these Zionist Jews, they do not like anyone. They don't care who you are. But yeah, notice, they're attacking them, they're hitting them, they're throwing stuff at them. We got you on film.
We got you saying nothing to the children.
We're leaving, and you're following.
Very good.
See, the little kid, he even takes off his little hat, and he's trying to cover the camera. They know what they're doing, and they've been trained, and it's absolutely disgusting that, hate, racism, all these things, it's not born, it's taught. This is a powerful message from a child of Gaza. Bara Abu Rus, 7 years old, was evacuated to the U.S. from Gaza for medical treatment. He highlighted the suffering of his people amid Israel's war. Let's pull up this clip and actually take a look to what he has to say here. I want to send a message to the whole world. The children of Gaza are like the children of the world. Everyone, if you allow me, close your eyes and imagine. Imagine just a second ago your son died. Imagine with me your daughters, 4 limbs were removed. Imagine your house was bombed and you don't know if your son is dead or not. God knows. Imagine with me. Imagine with me those in tents, sitting in the cold. They have no food, no drinking water. Imagine with me. Imagine when you go back home, you don't find your home or your family. Imagine your son wants to eat, but you don't know how to bring him food. Imagine you died. Your son and your children become orphans. O world, O people, we are not numbers, not 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. We are martyrs. Pray for Gaza and support Gaza. Peace be upon you. Wow. A lot to say from him. And it's powerful hearing, children preach the message of what is actually happening in Gaza.